Welcome to Meteorology Matters Explains. Sometimes to understand a really big story, you just have to pull on one little thread. And today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to see how one thing connects to another and another, touching everything from disaster response to how we literally take our planet's temperature. So, let's get into it.
Everything kicks off right here. This is the latest forecast for the Atlantic hurricane season from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. NOAA is calling for an above-normal season, predicting anywhere from 13 to 19 named storms. It's a number that definitely gets your attention and reminds you how important it is to be ready.
And that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? As communities are looking at that forecast and getting prepared, the main agency that's supposed to lead the charge, FEMA, it's facing a whole lot of uncertainty itself.
So this is the first thread we're pulling on. There's been talk, according to reports, of completely remaking the agency as we know it, maybe even eliminating it in its current form and pushing more responsibility onto the states. And this has leaders from both sides of the aisle, in red states and blue states, scrambling to figure out what a future without that federal backstop might even look like.
Okay, so that's the response system. But what about getting ahead of the problem? Let's pull the next thread, which takes us deep into the core rules that govern, pretty much everything to do with our climate and air quality.
It all comes down to this one thing from 2009 called the endangerment finding. Honestly, this is the legal bedrock for almost every single federal rule on emissions. It affects your car's gas mileage, pollution from power plants, everything. And it's all based on one simple idea, that greenhouse gases are a threat to public health, so the EPA can regulate them.
So you can see the journey here. It started with a big Supreme Court case back in 2007, got locked in with the official finding in 2009, and has been the foundation of U.S. climate policy ever since. But now, there's a proposal for 2025 to just get rid of it. The argument is that the EPA never should have had that power to begin with. And if you do that, you're not just fighting one regulation, you're taking out the foundation for all of them.
So if these rules are all about a danger to public health, you have to ask, right? Where does the science proving that danger actually come from? Well, that question pulls the next thread in our story, leading us straight to the science office inside the EPA itself.
The EPA's research office is, as this union leader perfectly put it, the agency's heart and brain. It's the part that does the independent science, giving the rulemakers the facts they need. But now, a new plan proposes to completely eliminate this office by July 2025.
You can really see the impact when you just look at the raw numbers. This plan would slash the agency's total workforce down to levels we haven't seen since the Reagan administration. And inside that science office, the proposed changes have already caused hundreds of scientists to head for the exits.
But what are we actually losing here? I mean, it's not just numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about the career experts, the people who study things that affect every single one of us. Things like, what does wildfire smoke do to our lungs? How safe is our drinking water? What's the best way to handle a chemical spill? That's the expertise that's walking out the door.
Now, to get the full picture, you have to look at the reasons given for these huge changes. The people who support them say that these moves are about fixing what they see as government overreach and, frankly, regulations that are just too expensive.
And this really gets to the heart of the debate. It comes down to two completely different ways of looking at the economics. One side says, look, these rules are just too costly. They hurt businesses, they hurt consumers, they raise prices. The other side says, hold on, when you add up the benefits, like fewer people in the hospital, fewer premature deaths, the regulations actually save society a ton of money.
This perspective, which you see here from the Heritage Foundation, really frames the whole thing as an issue of economic relief. The core argument is pretty simple. Get rid of these rules, and you'll lower the cost of living for everybody.
And then you have the complete opposite view from a former EPA leader. Here, the focus isn't on cost, but on consequences. The argument is that taking apart a world-class organization is incredibly short-sighted and, at the end of the day, won't do the American people any favors.
Which brings us to the last thread. And this one might be the biggest one yet. If the regulations are based on science, and the science is done by the EPA, where does the EPA get its raw data from? Well, it turns out that even that original source is now on the table.
A proposed federal budget actually includes a plan to shut down the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii. And look, this is not just some random lab.
This place has been running since 1958, and it's responsible for the famous Keeling curve, the single most important continuous record of CO2 in our atmosphere. Period.
And this is what Mauna Loa has shown the world. A clear, undeniable record of change stretching back almost 70 years. I mean, look at that. It started at 316 parts per million and is now on track to blow past 430. This data is what answered that fundamental question. Is humanity actually changing the atmosphere? The answer was yes.
I just love this metaphor from a former NOAA administrator. It makes so much sense. He says it's like going to the doctor for a regular checkup. You get your blood work done so you can spot any problems early. Shutting down the observatory would be like deciding to just stop going to the doctor. You'd be flying blind.
So we're left with this question. When the planet has a fever, how will we even know if we decide to break the thermometer? We followed the thread, from disaster response to the rules that protect our health, all the way to the instruments that take the planet's pulse. What happens when the very tools we use to see the problem are the first things to go? For more great content on the weather itself, you should definitely be following meteorologist Rob Jones. You can find him on Instagram as Meteorologist, on TikTok as TV Meteorologist, and over on YouTube at Rob Jones Hurricane, where you'll also find the Meteorology Matters podcast playlist.